Welcome to another training session with ATGA. This is Chris Langdon. Today we're going to talk about copoly strings and string tension. I've been talking about copoly strings now for 10 years and how the lower string tensions really help out and add spin and power to your game. Most of you have already tried it and love it, but now here's the education process and the information for you to really see why this works and how important it is to your game. We look forward to customizing your rackets and getting them in perfect working condition. Enjoy this session.
Today is all about topspin. I've been investigating the science of spin and how new string technology is helping to change the way the game is played. A tennis court is pretty long, but as any beginner will tell you, it's actually too short. That's because even with a slow, relaxed swing, we can accidentally put the ball all the way into the back fence. Topspin changes this, because topspin makes balls travel in an arc. We hit topspin by swinging from low to high, where the friction between the ball and the strings puts spin on it. Topspin is so important to today's players because it allows them to hit as hard as they can, high over the net for safety and margin of error, and then watch the spin drive the ball down into the court. New copoly string technology, which is essentially polyester with various often slippery chemical additives, helps players hit with more spin than ever before. I'm going to illustrate the surprising way in which these strings generate so much spin.
The faster and steeper a player's swing, the more topspin he can put on the ball. So players like world number 1 Rafael Nadal launch themselves into their shots with spin-optimized technique. And here's Nadal again hitting forehands in practice. These balls are flying about 70 miles an hour. But notice how high they clear the net before his extreme spin drives them down. Some clear it by 6 feet or more, and then jump to his opponent's shoulder, making them very difficult to handle. And that one's about 95 miles an hour. Since they became popular with the pros in the mid to late 90s, copoly strings have helped Nadal and other players hit with more spin than any previous generation. Here's tennis as it was played in 1970, during a match between Australian legends Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall. In the Wood era, players hit with little spin, so they had to be careful not to hit too hard and send the ball out of bounds. But watch the skill and finesse, the forward and back, cat and mouse tactics of the game in those days. Today's pros play a very different game. Here, Nadal and world number 3, Novak Djokovic, in this summer's U.S. Open final in New York. Spin and power have transformed the sport, and copoly strings have had a large part to play in this.
The game-changing spin of copoly strings was obvious to players and commentators for years, but not to scientists. Their lab research showed that all strings were the same in terms of spin potential. But one thing everyone agreed on, that is, copoly strings don't need to be straightened after each point. Remember in the old days, players were constantly straightening their strings between each point. With copoly strings, you don't need to do that. And players believe this is because copoly strings literally do not move. And some feel that this increases the friction between the ball and the strings, and thus gives more spin. But a few scientists thought something else was going on. They noted that if we strum nylon strings, they get stuck. And then we've got to straighten them, just like during play. But with copoly strings, if we strum them, they snap right back. What if copoly strings always appear to be in the same place, not because they don't move, but because they move and then snap back? But could this happen during play? And could it influence spin generation? No one knew what happened during the 4,000ths of a second when the ball is in contact with the strings. But several years ago, a Japanese robotics professor trained his ultra-high-speed 10,000 frame per second camera on used nylon strings. This is what he saw. Notice how, on impact, the ball pushes a few of the strings out of place. Now the strings rebound and launch the ball away. But the strings that got moved out of place pretty much stay out of place. This is just how strings get stuck during play. Now, watch what happens when the same strings have been coated with a lubricant. Did you see it? The strings moved and snapped back into place, just like when we strummed copoly strings earlier. But it's hard to catch it, even in super slow motion, which is part of the reason this was misunderstood for 15 years. Let's watch it again. As the ball sinks into the strings, the main or horizontal strings slide with it. Now watch. As the ball flies off the strings snap back. They bow and then snap back. And as they snap back, they give the ball an extra kick, a sideways kick that puts extra spin on the ball. With lubricated strings, it became clear that some strings do give more spin than others. And strangely, not because of more friction, but because of less. Other scientists have done similar studies with copoly strings and found that they behave pretty much the same as lubricated ones. And, just as the players said, they give extra spin.
But it's a pretty level playing field, as most players now use some form of copoly. World number 2, Roger Federer, here pairs natural gut with famous Luxlon strings. It's unclear how much more spin new innovations could provide in the future, whether the rules makers will, at some point, step in, and how the game will evolve from here.
I hope you have enjoyed this ATGA training session. If you have any questions, comments, observations, please don't hesitate to call or email me. And if you need us to come and pick up your racket and restring it for you, we'd be happy to do it. We look forward to seeing you and hope you enjoyed this session.